A bright start to Saturday, some patchy cloud in the west and the far north. The rain in the north of Scotland, though, easing through the day so that most places end up brighter, with lengthy spells of sunshine by the afternoon and increasingly warm. I think by and large mid to high teens for Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England, but for central and southeast England 20 to 24 Celsius possible on Saturday afternoon. Nevertheless, with the increased warmth, we're going to see an increased threat of showers starting to push up from the southwest and then developing widely across southern parts of the UK during Saturday night. Perhaps even some thunderstorms, some intense rain in places. Further showers or thunderstorms on Sunday as well as Monday, turning warmer by Tuesday.
Since the first Gulf War, I've covered complex conflicts around the globe. For comprehensive coverage of the ongoing situation in Ukraine, join me, Alastair Stewart, every Saturday and Sunday from noon.
If you are the most authoritarian regime, at some point they will rise up.
Which can become more dangerous.
You cannot occupy a country of that size.
And that means World War III.
That means war.
Putin did not expect that.
That's me, Alastair Stewart, from 12, Saturday and Sunday on GB News.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question.
That's two questions, actually. That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips, where we get stuck into the big issues we need to be looking at in depth. Nothing is off the table and no one's going to get cancelled for saying what they think. Keeping me company today is Scarlett Maguire, former Labour advisor and writer. And here's what we're discussing on the show. War on the wonks. Having spent months trying to get them back into their offices, Jacob Rees-Mogg plans to boot 1/5 of them out for good. We discuss the planned cull of the civil service. Now, with more rumours circulating about Putin's health and a harrowing hush over Helsinki's NATO ambitions, what should the West expect next from Russia? And I'm going to be joined by the one and only Lord Frost to chew the cud over Brexit. He's in the States, where he's been explaining a thing or two about the Northern Ireland Protocol as Biden wades into the fray. That's what we're talking about for the next hour. But what do you need to get off your chest? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet the programme @GBNews. But first, it's time for the GB News headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 1 minute past 2. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom.
Unions are threatening national strikes over government plans to axe around 90,000 civil service jobs. The Prime Minister wants to free up billions of pounds to ease the cost of living crisis. Downing Street hasn't ruled out compulsory redundancies, but it's hoped a lot of the cuts will occur through natural attrition. Brexit Opportunities Minister Jacob Rees-Mogg says the cull will make the government more efficient.
What is being proposed is a hiring freeze. Up to 38,000 people leave the civil service every year. So over 2 to 3 years, that's how you achieve this number. And then if those jobs are essential, ministers can sign off people being moved into them so that you can continue the level of service simply with a smaller number of people.
The DUP is planning to block the election of a new Speaker to the Northern Ireland Assembly. It says the move will send a clear message to the EU and the government that the post-Brexit trading agreement isn't working and that the protocol risks peace in the country. Party leader Sir Geoffrey Donaldson also says the DUP won't nominate a Deputy First Minister, preventing a new executive from forming.
If the European Union is serious about protecting the political institutions and the Belfast Agreement and its successor agreements, the basis of political progress and stability in Northern Ireland, then they know what they need to do. And equally, the same message is there for our own government as well.
Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe is meeting the Prime Minister at Downing Street. The former British aid worker, who was held captive for 6 years in Iran, is speaking to Boris Johnson for the first time since returning to the UK in March. They're expected to discuss why it took so long to secure her release and how the government can help other British citizens being held hostage abroad. The UK has announced 12 new sanctions against Russia, targeting President Putin's financial network, including his ex-wife and cousins. The Foreign Secretary, who's in Germany for a G7 meeting, says pressure also needs to be applied on Moscow by supplying more weapons to Ukraine. The EU has announced it's providing a further £425 million worth of military support and hopes a deal can be reached for an embargo on Russian oil. Liz Truss spoke ahead of today's talks.
It's very important at this time that we keep up the pressure on Vladimir Putin by supplying more weapons to Ukraine, by increasing the sanctions. G7 unity has been vital during this crisis to protect freedom and democracy, and will continue to work together to do just that.
Colleen Rooney has told a court she was fuming after an article about an alleged car accident appeared in The Sun. Giving evidence at the so-called Wagatha Christie libel trial, she said the crash didn't happen and she suspected Rebecca Vardy of leaking stories from her social media account. She says the sting operation was a last resort. Mrs. Vardy denies allegations she leaked false stories, deleted WhatsApp messages and/or spoke to journalists. Elon Musk's £34.5 billion Twitter deal has been put on hold, but he says he's still committed to the acquisition. The Tesla CEO says he's waiting for data on the number of spam and fake accounts, which are thought to represent less than 5% of users. One of Mr. Musk's key aims is to, in his own words, defeat the spam bots. And the Queen has arrived for day 2 of the Royal Windsor Horse Show, looking smiley and relaxed for one of the highlights of her year. After missing the state opening of Parliament earlier in the week, there'd been speculation she might not attend the annual event. More than 500 horses and 1,000 performers are taking part in the grounds of Windsor Castle. She's attended every year since it started in 1943. It's the first major event in the Queen's Platinum Jubilee festivities, celebrating her 70-year reign. And Amir Khan has announced the end of his boxing career, confirming his retirement in a social media post. Khan became an overnight sensation after winning an Olympic silver medal at the 2004 Athens Games. He was just 17 years old. He then turned professional, becoming unified world champion and establishing himself as one of the country's most celebrated boxers. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now it's back to Alex and We Need to Talk About.
It's Mog versus the Blob. Having stalked Whitehall's abandoned offices, penning punctilious pleas for pen pushers to sack off sofas and return to their desks, the Minister for Government Efficiency is now threatening to cull 1/5 of an almost 500,000 strong civil service workforce to save taxpayers £3.5 billion a year. The sudden flurry of P45s would bring staffing levels back to pre-pandemic numbers when extra apparatchiks were drafted in to help the country by sitting in their lounges and busting backlogs that blight most government departments. It's hard not to sympathise with the Mogster, especially when a fleet of genetically modified squirrels would probably do a better job processing passports than the Home Office. But for a government that professes to want to level up the country, the decision to actually create unemployment during a cost of living crisis goes against every previous administration's crafty trick of injecting bits of the blob into hard-to-reach parts of the country to plug employment holes. At one stage, almost a third of Welsh workers were paid by the government, while the tax office to the prison service have had departments deliberately distributed in and around red wall areas. Cutbacks may save Rish's coffers, but might a bonfire of bureaucrats cost the Tories the next election? Well, joining me now on the show is GB News political correspondent Tom Harwood. Tom, explain what's going on, what is Mog planning and why?
Well, this is something that has been in the works for quite some time. Some people may remember that 2 months ago, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Simon Clarke, delivered a lecture to the Institute of Economic Affairs, spelling out how the size of the civil service has swelled in recent years, up 23% from 2015-16 to today. And at that point, he made the announcement that the government wanted to reduce the civil service, the size of it, down to 2019 levels. Now, that was down by 7%, not 23%, but still a substantial reduction. What we have learned about what happened yesterday in that Stoke cabinet meeting, that regional cabinet meeting, is that the government is being more ambitious on this, that they want to return to 2015-16 levels. Now, many people will argue there's good reason why the civil service expanded after 2015-16. It had to do more things. There was some complicated statecraft to manage. We had to negotiate our way out of a 40-year relationship of treaties with our nearest and largest trading partner. And indeed, the COVID response required a huge amount of effort from the civil service as well. There are questions, legitimate questions, as to whether or not our exit from COVID will also require the same number of personnel. However, on the other hand, people have noted that the civil service productivity levels are fairly low. There's this endemic problem of not the problem of working from home, but what is being done when people are working from home. And in many parts of the private sector, you'll have a sort of 2 in, 3 out, or a 3 in, 2 out system. In the civil service, there are many departments where huge chunks of the department don't come in at all. That's a big concern of the Brexit Opportunities and Government Efficiency Secretary, Jacob Rees-Mogg. And one of the big reasons why there are questions being raised as to whether the civil service could do more with less. After all, they did in 2015-16.
Tom, thank you very much. Well, let's talk to General Secretary of the FDA Union, Dave Penman, and the Director of Strategy at the Adam Smith Institute, John MacDonald. There they are. Now, I'm going to start with you, Dave Penman. What is your reaction to this? I mean, a lot of people fairly horrified that they found out about this proposed cull via the media.
Well, yeah, I mean, first of all, it's no way to treat public servants. It's a kind of HR practice more akin to P&O ferries than it should be for a government to brief 1 in 5 job cuts to a newspaper and for civil servants to wake up overnight and find that out. But I mean, ultimately, the difficulty here is what we've got as a number. They've picked a moment in time that's politically convenient, 2016, and saying, well, we just want to go back to 2016, please. And we're not in 2016. Things have happened since then. The increase in the numbers in the civil service were to do things in response to the demands that government were making of it. And many of those demands are still there. Brexit isn't done. What happened as a result of Brexit is we took on a whole range of additional responsibilities that used to be done in Europe, and they still now have to be done. So if we're going back to 2016, but we've still got all this extra work, who's going to do it? So but it doesn't feel like a serious plan of government when you just come up with a number of staff. What they can do, and it would be legitimate, to say we want to save X amount of money and challenge departments to save money, whether that was through staff or less office space by increasing flexible working, as they did before. They saved £500 million between 2010 and 2015 by reducing the number of offices and allowing people to work flexibly. Those are serious plans. A number plucked out of the air and a date plucked out of the air is not a serious plan of government.
And what do you take? What's your take on this, John McDonnell? Is it a serious plan? I mean, there was Dave saying that working from home's actually saved about half a billion, and Jacob Rees-Mogg trying to save 7 times that amount by culling 1/5 of the civil service staff. Do we have a bloated civil service?
Yes, I think we do, and I welcome his plan to reduce the size of the civil service. I mean, I think it's important for him to move people who are working in non-essential jobs to essential jobs in the civil service and look for efficiencies during a cost of living crisis. It grew a lot to take on Brexit and then the pandemic, but I think now that we're moving out of the sort of the immediate high-intensity stages of both, it's incumbent on the government to seek efficiencies and ensure taxpayer money is being put to good use.
David, I mean, it seems to have become trendy to bash the civil service lately, especially particularly under this government, perhaps, where Dominic Cummings, of course, didn't really keep his cards close to his chest when it comes to what he thought of Whitehall. And there's been a lot of headlines about the fact that so many civil servants continue to work from home, with people saying, well, how is that fair? And are they getting on with their jobs, especially when you've got departments like the Passport Office really struggling to get people their passports on time? So do you think that there is justified criticism of the civil service and there is a lot of dead weight that probably needs to be hacked off?
So, I mean, if you look at the figure they're talking about 2016, at that point the civil service was at its smallest since the Second World War. And the rhetoric around working from home is just nonsensical. The Passport Office, most of the staff in the Passport Office can't work from home because it's not the nature of the job. They're struggling with a huge demand. They've actually produced more passports than they ever have. They produced 1 million passports in the last month, when normally they produced 5 million in a whole year. We need to deal with the reality of this, not just this rhetoric and constant kind of culture war against the civil service. The Passport Office can't recruit staff. Have they to lose 1 in 5 staff now? Is that going to solve the passport crisis? Are we saying that the border force that's patrolling the short straight crossings with the illegal immigration coming across there, have they to lose 1 in 5 staff? Have the MOD to lose 1 in 5 staff when we're facing a new Cold War, or the Foreign Office? That's why I'm saying the government can legitimately say it wants to save money. But the idea that you just pluck these numbers out of the air or dates out of the air demonstrate that it's not a serious plan. A serious plan to save money is one that takes time. Like last year, the government announced 5% cut to the civil service budget over the term of the spending review. That was managed and negotiated over months between Treasury and departments. That's a serious approach to government efficiency. This isn't. This is just headline grabbing.
I mean, John, Dave's saying that there's been a bit of a culture war against the civil service. It does seem rather miserly to be threatening people with losing their jobs amidst a cost of living crisis. Do you think that this is about headline grabbing, or is Jacob Rees-Mogg just doing what he's supposed to be doing, which is ensuring government efficiency?
I think the latter, to be honest. As far as I'm aware, it's not that there's people being fired, it's that there's going to be a recruitment freeze and then people moved, hopefully, from non-essential jobs to essential jobs. So I'm not sure I quite agree with that characterization. But to go a bit further, I think it's also very important to frame this in a cost of living crisis. The government has to be looking at saving money in every way possible. I don't think they're going far enough to support households who need it the most. As I say, during this crisis, people are being hit really hard. And so by making more savings from the civil service, they could perhaps fund, a greater extent of support that they're currently not offering.
Yeah, people who might need support are those who could be potentially about to lose their jobs. Dave Penman from the FDA Union and Director of Strategy at the Adam Smith Institute. John McDonnell, thank you so much for coming on the programme. Well, let's talk to my presenter friend now, Scarlett Maguire, who's a former Labour advisor and writer, and the wonderful Tom Harwood is still with us. Scarlett, it's funny, isn't it? There does seem to be, I suspect, this growing headline-grabbing culture war against the civil service. Do you think Jacob Rees-Mogg is profiting from that a bit? And where do you think that's come from?
Yeah, I mean, this is all about headlines, because actually, if you really want to make the civil service smaller and more efficient. You don't do a recruitment freeze so that the people leaving are not going to be replaced. You have it strategically. You work out what jobs you want, what jobs you can lose, and you begin it like that. I mean, they're talking as if every civil servant can do any job, right? That there aren't specialisms, which I think was probably true in the 50s and maybe the 60s. It certainly hasn't been true in the last 30 years. So it's crazy, but you just know it's another thing that's not going to happen. It's like Jacob Rees-Mogg going on about working from home. Actually, what the civil service has done is they've cut offices. They've stopped leasing some buildings. Because of people working from home, they've saved a lot of money. There are no longer enough desks for the civil servants. Actually, if you look at it, you cannot do it by this short, cut. You need to say, what do we want? How are we going to get there? I mean, by the time they've got rid of their redundant, and everybody's going to go for redundancy, you know, there's no future. I mean, it's going to cost them a fortune, and we're just going to have a really, really inefficient civil service.
I mean, there is a bit of a culture, isn't there, of blaming the civil service for a lot of stuff. Public sector workers, aren't their lives cushy? They get guaranteed pay rises, pensions, a load of them work from home. How nice. You should work in the real world, the private sector. But very often public sector workers, and surely a lot of them now, are going to be sitting there thinking, is that my job on the line?
Well, I do have to declare an interest here. I've got family who work in the civil service, and I have to say that some people who work in the civil service are clearly brilliant. There are an absolute... I think I'd be chastised by my family if I didn't say that.
But
no,
even
clearly,
people who aren't your family could be brilliant.
I would totally concede that point. I'm sure there are many, many people who are absolutely wonderful and public-spirited and everything within the civil service. However, I do also hear horror stories of people who have been in the same job for decades and never really moving on, and perhaps don't do as much work as they might do in the private sector. And one of the issues with the civil service is that it is very hard to get rid of people who underperform. And frankly, this is why there is the hiring freeze as opposed to particular working out efficiencies. It's not because this is the best way to do it, because it's not the best way to reduce a workforce, to just say we won't take any more people on. It's the politically possible way to do it, because there are so many institutional obstacles to getting, to letting people go who are underperforming. And this is one of the big tragedies of the civil service as it currently exists. You have some people who work the jobs of multiple people, for example, with how efficient they are, and some people who do very little, near enough nothing at all, and never the twain shall meet. So really, there is, I think, widely considered a job to be done in every organisation, whether it's public or private sector. There is always a drive for efficiency. But it does seem that within the civil service, this is always a little bit harder to reach. It seems that particularly the union culture is a lot stronger.
Now, Scarlett, what strikes me is previous governments, including the Labour government, have actually used making sure that civil service employment is spread out around the country as a fantastic way to get employment and get jobs into areas that otherwise could suffer quite high levels of unemployment. And there's constantly been this push to get the civil service out of Westminster. And I can think of a number of offices, whether it's the prison service, whether it's the Department of Work and Pensions, whether it's Prescription Pricing Authority, with offices in other parts of the country. Oh, hold on, I'm just hearing we're going to cross live to Downing Street. So I was going to ask you that, but here we go. We're going to cross live to Downing Street instead and pick this up afterwards.
And came out fairly, forlorn in the sense we were having to battle for longer. I stand here now, the battle over for us. I think there are lessons to learn. There's a wider, there's a wider problem to ask. And we talked about some. I mean, there were some mistakes made at the end. It was rough at the end, and I think that does need to be. When Naz's ready to talk about it, that there's something to go through. But no, I think it's not like when this is over that you feel angry. I think relief is honestly what I
You said the Prime Minister didn't explicitly apologise, but do you feel that he accepts that he made a huge mistake and that it had a big impact?
I think it's undeniable that it's so public. She said it openly. It's been said on the telly many times, and we've all seen it. I said to him, we often said better late than never. 6 years is a long time, but late is a lot better than never. It really is, and I'm glad they settled it. I'm glad she's home, and in the end, they paid the money.
And you hope that he now helps others who are still stranded there.
So that's right. So we raised Murad Tabas, and Nazanin also raised the case of a man who's on death row who's from Sweden, because the Prime Minister's just come back from Sweden. And we've just said that up, and Nazanin kept making the point that people who went in quite soon around the time she went in, they're not home yet, and she's home, and she feels very guilty about that. She wants them to be back as well, and she can't sit here and enjoy her life knowing there are people going through the same conditions that she went through. And she talked a bit about what she went through when she was actually in jail, and it was quite difficult to hear, actually, to sit there and listen to it. It's not like I don't know the details, but to hear it again quite in the manner that she was laying it out is quite difficult to hear.
So it was pretty stark, not an easy time for the Prime Minister over the last hour, hearing her testimony and some of the important issues that she raised.
I think he found it interesting, actually. I think he enjoyed meeting her. I think he found it interesting, and I think it wasn't anything he hadn't heard before, in a sense.
Yeah, I don't think it was an abrasive meeting.
No.
We're here in happier circumstances than previous meetings. I'm glad we are.
Feels a sense of closure.
Perhaps not closure. I did mean it when I asked him, please do try and give evidence. He said he would look at it. I think, he's been a part of our case in different roles. It's important that his perspective is shared honestly with Parliament. It's important that Parliament does that job to dig into government and work out, what were the lessons so that it doesn't happen again. And let's hope that goes somewhere.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Well, that was the MP Tulip Siddiq and the husband of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, Richard Ratcliffe, there, talking outside Downing Street, where Nazanin, who was freed in March after 6 years in detention, has probably had the opportunity to ask the UK Prime Minister what took so long following the final repayment of a £400 million debt dating back to the 1970s with Iran. You're with GB News on TV and radio. It's time for a short break now and a check on the weather forecast.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity. That's the question. That's two questions, actually. That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
And so the world has watched and waited at what Russia would say in reaction to Finland's loud assertion that they plan to join NATO. The hellfire and brimstone, the fire and the fury, well, it all seems rather lacking, doesn't it? Other than Putin's patsy, ex-President Dmitry Medvedev repeating the usual tired nuclear threat like a broken Soviet-era record, The only concrete proposal coming from the Kremlin appears to be shoving some radars along the 800-mile border. We all thought Putin's blood would boil at this point. Well, recordings from an oligarch reportedly close to him claim the Russian leader may be suffering from terminal blood cancer, with the allegation that those around him, in fear for their own safety, are prepared to wait out Putin's reign of terror, while other more outlandish claims suggest the tyrant may be enrolling body doubles to cover forthcoming absences and is undergoing wacky therapies such as bathing in antler blood. Well, perhaps the West, too, is making some calculated risk as Vlad's own Privy Council in the hope that in a race towards elimination, Putin will meet his final demise before he metes out more war in Europe. Well, joining me now is Sean Monahan, who's a visiting fellow at the Centre for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C., focusing on European security and defence. Sean, we haven't heard a huge outcry yet from Russia about Finland's plans. Do you think that they're holding some cards back? Do you think they don't quite know what to do about this? Or do you think that, you know, the worst is yet to come?
Hi, Alex. Good morning from Washington, D.C., and thank you for having me. I think it's first worth saying that yesterday was a historic day for Finland, announcing officially its intent to join NATO, and that will be followed up with due process in the coming days and weeks. It's significant because for the first time in NATO's history, a member, and we also expect Sweden to follow suit and look to join NATO, has decided to join NATO in the direct response to a specific date and event, and that date and event, of course, being the 24th of February 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine. To your point on the threats from Russia, we've heard, I think, talk of the threat now, Russia's response, military technical measures, whatever that means. You've talked about radars. Some of those were already there, of course, but Russia has discussed its response as now being in relation to whatever kind of NATO forces or infrastructure end up in Finland and Sweden as a result of this. On that, I would expect Finland and Sweden perhaps to go the way of Norway, who actually don't host any NATO forces or infrastructure on their territory, but otherwise participate fully in the alliance. And of course, it's worth saying that Finland and Sweden are more than used to Russian malign influence, hybrid influencing, as the Finns call it, and are more than capable of dealing with Russia's threats, rhetoric and coercion.
Now, rumours abound again about Vladimir Putin's health. And do you think that there are people who say that that could escalate this crisis? It could make him a far more desperate tyrant. And others who say, well, you know, he's not doing so well. Perhaps if we wait a little longer, maybe he'll clear off and no longer be in charge of Russia and the world will be a better and safer place. Do you think that's being too complacent?
Well, I've heard both of those arguments. It's very difficult to get inside Mr. Putin's head. Of course, this is a man who said he wouldn't invade Ukraine famously, and then invaded Ukraine. So it's very difficult to get inside his head. I think what the West has to do, and what it is doing, and Finland and Sweden looking to join NATO as part of this, is take Russia very seriously, and is to prepare for the worst case, a number of worst case scenarios. So prepare to defend Eastern Europe, and we see the NATO presence in Eastern Europe having been built up dramatically since the war started. And now we see Finland and Sweden looking to join NATO. It's worth noting that, of course, all of this is happening in direct response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Russia has showed its colours, as it were, and it is clearly able and willing to use large-scale military force to devastating effect to invade other countries. And this is a watershed moment and a game changer for NATO and Europe, and the West as a whole is responding forcefully.
Sean Monahan, thank you ever so much for coming on the programme, visiting fellow in the Europe, Russia and Eurasia programme at the Centre for Strategic and International Studies over in America. Well, let's talk to Gwydion Prince, who's a former advisor to the Military of Defence, NATO and the UN. Gwydion, fantastic to have you back on the programme. Now, in the run-up to May the 9th, we heard, didn't we, that Putin needed some sort of scalp for his Victory Day parade. He might resort to using some sort of pretty ferocious weapons to make sure that he secured parts of the Donbass. He might declare martial law to escalate things and enforce conscription in Russia to escalate the war. But so far, none of these things have happened. And we've heard that Ukraine are now wiping out Russian battalions. Is the tide beginning to turn?
Well, I think the tide turned quite some time ago. There have been really three strategic moments, picking up from your previous contributor, since the beginning of Putin's war. The first was when the Ukrainians successfully managed to stop the blitzkrieg attack on Kyiv and on Kharkiv in days 1 to 3. The second was the revelations of the Bucha massacres, which is when the penny finally dropped in the West that the Ukrainians' war was our war. And the third is this geopolitical game changer of the Finns now announcing that they are going to join NATO, for goodness sakes, with the likelihood that the Swedes will follow. It transforms the strategic environment of northeastern Europe.
And do you think that this could risk an escalation and a desperate final sort of roll of the dice by Putin, or is he just a sick man who's humiliated on the world stage?
Mr. Putin, what is Mr. Putin? He's clearly not the Tsar savior of Russia. He's just a very naughty boy and a very evil boy and probably a very sick boy too, as I think many people now realize. There's been in authoritative medical circles a view for quite some time that he's suffering from Parkinson's disease, and he's clearly sick in some way. What's interesting is that he's now, as dictators do, he's now looking for scapegoats. And there are reports coming that he started off by arresting some of his intelligence chiefs, and now he's been arresting or dismissing some of his military chiefs, so that the blame for this military catastrophe, of which the destruction of the battalion trying to cross the river just a day ago is only the latest, that won't lie with him. But his cupboard is bare militarily, frankly, apart from waving nuclear weapons. And of course, the crucial thing about the adhesion of these Nordic countries, Alex, is that what they are principally looking for is what we, the United Kingdom, offered, without saying so, yesterday, with the signing of these agreements, which is that they're not looking for us to put boots on the ground necessarily. They're looking for our nuclear shield, because we are the second most important nation in NATO, and we are a nuclear power. And so in the interim, in the grey period, we are now extending that shield without having to say so, because we don't talk about it. That's what deterrence is, when you make it strong.
Well, good for us, Gwydion. Fantastic having you back on the programme, Gwydion Prince there. You are with GB News on TV and DAB Radio. Coming up, we'll be talking to former Brexit chief negotiator Lord Frost about why he thinks the Northern Ireland Protocol needs to be scrapped. Now, though, it's time for a check on the news headlines.
It's 2:35. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Unions are threatening national strikes over government plans to axe around 90,000 civil service jobs. The Prime Minister wants to free up billions of pounds to ease the cost of living crisis. Downing Street hasn't ruled out compulsory redundancies, but it's hoped a lot of the cuts will occur through natural attrition. The DUP says blocking the election of a Speaker to the Northern Ireland Assembly sends a message to the EU and the government that the post-Brexit trading agreement isn't working. Party leader Sir Geoffrey Donaldson also says they won't nominate a Deputy First Minister, preventing a new executive from forming.
If the European Union is serious about protecting the political institutions and the Belfast Agreement and its successor agreements, the basis of political progress and stability in Northern Ireland, then they know what they need to do. And equally, the same message is there for our own government as well.
Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe's husband says the Prime Minister didn't explicitly apologise for how her detention in Iran was handled. The former British aid worker, who was held captive for 6 years, met Boris Johnson for the first time since returning to the UK in March. She told the Prime Minister his words had a big impact on her, and she'd lived in the shadow of those words for the best part of 4.5 years. And smiling and looking relaxed, the Queen has attended the Royal Windsor Horse Show. The monarch's attended every year since it started in 1943. It's the first major event in the Queen's Platinum Jubilee festivities, celebrating her 70-year reign. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. It's back to Alex, and we need to talk about in just a moment.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
The EU war-gamed a fragile peace agreement to try to entrap the UK in regulatory orbit is not lost on Brexiteers. There are recordings of EU negotiator Michel Barnier being uncomfortably questioned over the gamble of using the Irish border as a negotiating chip. There are also patent facts Brussels simply can't deny. That the protocol actually threatens the very peace agreement it cynically references as the reason for its existence. That it was the EU who exploited it to block shipments of vaccines into Northern Ireland after hideously bungling their own procurement process. That most of the products would never be destined for onward sale, nor suddenly contain botulism or lead poisoning. Surely the rest of the world can see quite how ridiculous a foreign trading bloc dictating what can and can't pass from one side of a sovereign nation to the other is. But somehow, our government has tragically failed to push these points, while Brussels acts like a bully, point-blank refusing to renegotiate reasonably. Well, perhaps Brussels has overplayed their hand, with a growing understanding in Washington of how unpalatable a willfully intransigent EU is, as Northern Ireland's power-sharing agreement lies in tatters. Well, joining me now is former Brexit chief negotiator, Lord David Frost. Lord Frost, it's fantastic to have you on the programme. I understand you're talking the good talk over in America and trying to twist some arms as Biden wades into the fray.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to be here, Alex. We are indeed trying to push the case that the protocol is at the end of the line. The best way forward would have been to renegotiate it, as we suggested last year, but we keep hearing from the EU, the government keeps hearing that they're not interested in doing that. They're only interested in talking on their terms. And I think we've reached the end of the road. At least that's what I would tell the government. And they now need to act to protect the integrity of the country and the UK's own internal market rather than the EU's.
There'd be people who say that the DUP today refusing to nominate a speaker so Stormont can once again form itself and sit are holding the people of Northern Ireland to ransom, while others would say that if you want to go down the route of scrapping the Northern Ireland Protocol, well, you're calling out all-out trade war with the EU and they'll retaliate, and that'll be terrible in a cost of living crisis. What do you say about those 2 points?
Well, I think the situation in Northern Ireland speaks for itself. To make progress in Northern Ireland, you need the consent of both communities and all range of opinion, and it's very clear that that doesn't exist. And the DUP's refusing to nominate a speaker and to take part in the institution simply symbolises that fact. It doesn't cause it, it just makes it obvious. It makes clear what we have been saying for a long time, which is that you can only proceed by consensus, and that's how it is. So we've got to find another way forward. I think the EU has suggested that it might retaliate against the UK if we take measures. Let's see. I'm not convinced everybody in the EU will be really up for a trade war with the UK, but you never know. But some things are more important. The integrity of the country is important. The unity of the country is important, and it's the job of the British government to defend those things. And I think the government has been very flexible, very patient, very keen to try and find a consensus way forward with the EU, but it just hasn't been possible. And in the end, the unity of the country has to be paramount.
Now, the fact that the government has talked up repeatedly scrapping the Northern Ireland Protocol and actually hasn't, is this delay, do you think, about trying to win moral high ground when it comes to the eyes of the world? And how is that sort of PR battle going?
Well, I think it would obviously have been best to agree a new protocol, a revised protocol. It was a delicately balanced thing initially, agreed in very difficult and tense circumstances. And it's not at all surprising to me and a lot of observers that it's needed adjustment. And I think that would have been the right way to look at it. Negotiate a new arrangement, because we'll always need some sort of arrangement with the EU covering Northern Ireland that does the job better. And you know, it's frustrating that the EU doesn't seem to want to do this. So I think the delays have been caused by the British government trying everything, trying to avoid the kind of problems that we may now be ahead of us, trying to be reasonable, trying to do the right thing. But unfortunately, it just looks as if that's going to be impossible, and there's going to be no other way forward.
You are, of course, over in America. How critical is Americans' intervention on this issue? Because people have often said that America, particularly the Democrat Party, which has a lot of American Irish voters, see themselves as a bit of a gatekeeper when it comes to the Good Friday Agreement, and so feel like they've got some skin in the game here. Do you think that Britain is going to be able to convince America to turn around and say to the EU, well, perhaps you are being the unreasonable ones?
Well, America's a great friend, obviously a great ally. It's played an important role in establishing the Good Friday Agreement and peace in Northern Ireland between the parties. And we agree with them. Protecting the Belfast Good Friday Agreement is extremely important. It's paramount. The problem is that the protocol is undermining it and causing significant problems to the Good Friday Agreement. And I think it's that point that isn't necessarily well understood in this administration, perhaps. I'm not sure that they have followed all the details of everything that's happening in Northern Ireland, the disruption that's being caused, the social disruption, the political difficulties. So I think it's good that if a team is coming across here to the UK to see what is happening, then they will see very quickly the problems. So I do think the administration should be careful in intervening on a question that involves the unity of a country of a very close ally and friend, and I would hope that they would be.
Lord Frost, it's fantastic to see you fighting the good fights for us over in America. Might we see you back on green benches at some point in the future here in the UK?
So, as I've said, I don't rule this out for the future. I don't think the moment is now. I've only just left government, but obviously, if people wanted me to do that, then I would certainly take it very seriously. But I don't think it's happening imminently.
Lord David Frost, thank you so much for coming on the programme, the former Brexit negotiator there. Well, let's hear from our studio guest, former Labour advisor and writer Scarlett Maguire. You're here, I think, to balance this out a little bit, am I right?
Well, I'm very old-fashioned. I think that if you sign an international treaty, that you take it seriously at the time and you don't say, well, you know, it's very difficult signing it. I mean, actually, what happened, we knew Northern Ireland was going to be a problem. We knew it all the way through the Brexit campaign, and both sides sort of ignored it because Northern Ireland's over there. And the people in Northern Ireland, they voted against Brexit, right? They were always worried about what it would mean. Theresa May had her backstop. People didn't like the backstop. It didn't work. And then Boris Johnson said, I've got an oven-ready deal, which wasn't oven-ready. We did the Northern Ireland Protocol after he'd promised Arlene Phillips that he wouldn't do that. He would not put a border down the Irish Sea. And then, predictably, because this does happen with Boris Johnson all the time, is he announces one thing and it doesn't work. And I think to say that Britain has bent over backwards, when frankly I have listened to Lord Frost over the years when he was negotiating, to call him belligerent is being quite polite. I mean, he's been belligerent against the Europeans. We are now in a complete mess. I mean, that's the truth. Northern Ireland is a problem, and it's a problem that we have to work through rather than shouting about.
I mean, I agree with you in many respects that if you make an international accord, you stick to it. But these were exceptional circumstances, weren't they? It'd been 4 years of politicking.
We did not have to do it, right? I mean, we had to get it right. That's what it mattered. The point about Brexit was we had to get it right. And over again. I mean, it's like, you know, Jacob Rees-Mogg just said we're not going to have these customs at the ports, right? And the ports are all going mad because they said we spent millions on it, and now you say we don't need it. Actually, the thing about doing Brexit is it's been done very badly, and it needed to be negotiated properly. Once the decision was made, it needed to be negotiated properly.
The issue is we are left with a protocol that is, I think, in the eyes of most people, substantial. But the EU now are not willing to get back round the table, and they can see what's going on in Northern Ireland. They can see that there is a lot of strife there, that they're unable to form any sort of administration. People might say the DUP shouldn't be digging their heels in, but it is what it is. Do you think that actually it's time that Brussels heeds our pleas and says, OK, look, fair enough, this thing isn't working? And what the government are asking, for instance, part of it is saying that, well, products that we know aren't going to be sold on, products priced up in British pounds, why on earth can't they pass through without checks?
Because we've got to stop having this war of words all the time, to having the tabloid, this anti-European stuff, which, I mean, I'm sure you're in favour of, begun decades ago, that actually we go to Brussels and say, how do we make this work? I think it's almost impossible to make it work, frankly. I mean, when I said to, you know, somebody quite high up in the Labour Party, I said, I do not understand how we sort out Northern Ireland and Brexit. And he said, there isn't a solution. And that is the problem. And I have to say, when you bring in America, right, I mean, it's all very well for Lord Frost to say the Democrats need to realise we need a trade deal with America. And we're putting that on hold for another 4 years because Biden really disapproves of what we're doing. I think what we're doing is really, really dangerous.
Scarlett, thank you. Well, I want to know your views. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet the programme @GBNews. Now, this weekend's winner of the Eurovision geopolitical popularity contest is more predictable than any year on record. And nobody is about to begrudge Ukraine's entry from taking the trophy, even if they were to enter Jedward doing a remastered version of Crazy Frog. But for the first time in a gazillion years, the UK is also a favourite, perhaps because we've been sending weapons to all the right places, while the Prime Minister has proven we do know how to party. Heaven forfend, we accidentally nicked top spots from Kiev. That little bit of Brexit forgiveness after successive years of nil point would soon turn into unbridled outrage. But it's not about the music anyway, is it? How else can you explain the fact that last year Italy won with a heavy metal track? Not exactly what you expect from the land of opera and amore. Well, joining me on the show now is Eurovision commentator and my old buddy, actually, Richard Salkeld. Richard, it's fantastic to see you after all these years. So tell me...
It's good to see you too, Alex.
Is it a pre-written fact that Ukraine's going to win this year?
There's no getting away from the fact that Ukraine certainly are in the top spot for the bookies' favourite to win this year's Eurovision Song Contest. But I think what's interesting is the real excitement is that for the first time in a long time, the UK has been teetering around the second and third place position for the bookies, which is really, as you said earlier, phenomenally different to what we've seen in years gone by. 25 years, in fact, since the UK last walked away with the trophy, with Katrina and the Waves, of course.
And the popularity of Eurovision, is it still as high as it ever was before? I mean, I must admit, I'll probably avoid it like the plague this weekend.
Well, there's a lot of people who certainly won't be avoiding it, Alex. Certainly here in Turin and other cities I've been in Italy this week, it's hard to escape the Eurovision fever. And I think, just touching on that about the UK being more popular than ever, we've been standing here for 20 minutes or so. We've had French and Germans coming up to us, spotting the UK flag and congratulating us on a really strong entry. Now, as somebody who's come to the Eurovision Song Contest for the past 10 or so years, that's never happened before. So that's really interesting. And I think that in these times when there's lots of other news happening in the world, Eurovision does offer that certain escapism for many people. Last year, I think it was something like 7.8 million people watching the contest last year, the highest figures since 2016. So it does feel as if the Eurovision appetite is stronger than ever.
Richard, lovely to see you again after all this time. Richard Salkeld there. I used to work with him at ITV Tyne Tees back in 2008. Now, in the woke world we live in, where inventing a mental illness is a modern-day must, I feel I probably owe someone an apology. If that's you, hiding at home with your decaphobia, could barely say it, cowering behind your sofa, glued to the news, quaking at the prospect of apocalypse on Friday the 13th, sorry to have triggered you. Don't worry, Putin won't nuke us, nor will Percy Pigs disappear from Ulster supermarket shelves. And that frightful cacophony of pop horror Eurovision isn't going to make you want to stab your inner ear with a knitting needle this weekend. Except, of course, all those things could well be true. As well as all of this, it must be time for the Alex Agenda. Now, calling a man bald is a form of sexual harassment, apparently, according to Far From Hirsute's judges, who claim that because mainly men suffer from follicular challenges, pointing out a chap's chrome dome should be outlawed. It comes after a Sparky, look at that lovely picture, took his former supervisor to court for calling him a bold four-letter word and was deeply hurt that his boss was pointing out the solar panel on his skull. I mean, how on earth gorgeous slapheads like, I don't know, I'll think of an example later, got through the horrors of daily life with a cue ball on their shoulders is beyond me. It's OK. In 10 minutes, you'll probably get an advert for spray-on hair. GB News has your back. And on the subject of my absolute favourite reformed close-cropped cove, the gorgeous Sebastian Vettel, whose surfer dude Bonts appeared on Question Time last night, they do say, never meet your heroes. Having swooned over his beautiful Vettel-y goodness, he's been helping young offenders, being one of life's good guys. Watching my crush of 15 years on the political panel show did rather destroy my daydreams of hanging out with him where he lives in neutral Switzerland, discussing the wonders of the old V10 engine and extolling the virtues of EU liberation. Turns out my dream man isn't much of a fan of Brexit, saying, you made your bed, now you have to lie in it. Well, I think all he needs is a thorough briefing by me. That's all I've got time for, apparently. Join me again for We Need to Talk About on GB News at the same time, 2 o'clock on Monday. Thank you, of course, to Scarlett Maguire, today's guest. Coming up next, it's The Briefing with Arlene Foster. But first, here's the weather.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Bright and warm day for southern parts of the UK, but windy further north with rain for some.